the YouTube University tool, shared upper-level math courses across schools. So thank you for the introduction. I'm actually trying to record this right now as I give the talk as further example of how easy this is to work. You will find out later if it's publicly posted on my webpage if it actually worked as promised. So in addition to thanking the organizers, I would also like to thank all the people who spoke before me. Of all the sessions I go to, it's stuff like this that has me most energized to return back to campus and to try to implement some of the stuff. So what I want to do is I want to follow up, except it started advancing. Okay, so I want to follow up on a talk I gave at a JMM a few years ago. And the motivation is to talk about how to share classes at liberal arts colleges. What's nice is we often have collaborations and colleagues. We know people at other schools. Is there a way for us to share the finite resources that we have? And all of us have finite resources. The question is just, what are the restrictions, what are the constraints? So the first implementation is I will be, I believe, the director of the small RU program at Williams College until I die, because no one else seems to want to do the administrative stuff. I see one of my colleagues who could replace me. If you ever want to lead a coup, I will support you. But I have met a lot of wonderful students over the years, and some of them go back to their home institutions and they say, well, I'm going to be a senior, I want to go to grad school, but we don't have complex analysis. And I said, well, actually, I'm teaching complex analysis. Would you like to take the class remotely? And what they report back is it's not as good as actually being there, but it's better than not having it. And that's not a bad place for me to live in my life in terms of that range. And so it worked, but it wasn't that formal. The next implementation was I actually had a class where we recruited from a bunch of liberal arts colleges. This was a problem-solving class. This was a terrific class to do online in terms of engaging students. And so most of the classes were asynchronous. We had a couple of classes at live, 8 a.m., because that was the one time of the day when no one was stupid enough to take a class. And so we just had a little budget, buy donuts or something at all the different schools for the people who are getting in at 8 a.m. But one of the issues in all of this is whether or not people can participate in real time. The third implementation, now the number of students is actually growing. So I taught operations research at Williams this past fall. This past fall. We had 6 students from Vassar and 3 from other schools. I'm going to be teaching the class again in the spring, but with no Williams students enrolled in it, just entirely with remote students. And the goal is to see how easy is it to do the class with all the videos and lectures recorded, with just the additional hours needed for office hours, grading, and TA sessions. So it's going to be a very interesting experiment, which I may be able to report back on in a year or 2 if I stay on the good side of the organizers. All right, so what I want to do for the talk is I want to discuss a little bit the mechanics of what goes on, the administrative issues, which I'll have to be a little bit careful about because I just realized I'm recording this. I will report on the class and the next steps. But most importantly, I want to hear what you are all doing. It should be set up so that your voices will not be captured by this. If that does make you feel uncomfortable, we can have a deliberate equipment malfunction as opposed to the undeliberate equipment malfunctions at the end, and I will just go like that. All right, so the mechanics. So when I teach the classes at Williams, I normally teach it in the mornings. I post the lectures by noon, so the lectures get up there fairly quickly. I record them and then just upload them through YouTube. The homework is submitted either in person if you're a Williams student or just emailed to the grader. Whenever I have at least 3 students at another school, I try to visit that school at least once and give a physical class there to get to know the students. I talk to everybody through the phone or through Skype or whatnot, but it's not the same as when you actually go there, have a pizza or something like that. Class participation at a lot of liberal arts colleges is extremely key, trying to get to know people. It is not the same for the remote students. I do see differences also in terms of the grades. The previous talk was wonderful in terms of all the data analysis it has. We have very small numbers here, so it's tough to tell all the different factors in terms of what is the impact of physically being present for the class versus the self-selection of who's choosing to take a class online. Is it, I'm interested in this, and it's not being offered at my school. Some years we seem to have extremely strong students from other schools, other years not as strong, a lot of things in flux. When I showed people a snapshot of my webpage a few years ago, the response was, this looks like something from 2000. And I had to respond, actually, no, the technology is from the late 90s. But what I like about this is it's easy. I can do it by myself. Whenever I get an email from William saying we are now shifting to this new course online system or we're upgrading to this new version, I just hit delete. because I maintain my own web pages. But the most important thing is when I'm sharing classes, I don't have any content that is protected by Williams College. Everything is publicly available. All the links are publicly available. All the videos are publicly available. We don't have to give students accounts so that they have access to our systems. Later, I will talk about another course that I did with some colleagues. And for that class, it was a little bit harder because we did have to make sure that all students had access to certain things through Canvas. It wasn't terrible. OIT was wonderful in terms of getting everything to work. Okay. So there's a lot of different implementation issues. A lot of them are what you would expect. Will students watch it? Well, depending on what system you're using, you can actually track how many of the students are watching it. You may or may not want to know the answer to that. How effective are the lectures online versus being there in person? Yeah, I talked about some of the strengths and weaknesses. There are technology failures. I occasionally have to give the same lecture again. It's amazing how much faster I seem to give it the second time. I can condense the 50 minutes into 20 or 30 minutes, a little bit less if my day is even packed more than that. One of the things that's nice is if you're teaching a class that has multiple sections, you actually then have the advantage of, I only need one section to work. I have, unfortunately, in my probability class, I had a section that failed last year, and I taught it again this year, and it failed again on the same day. It's like, oh, come on, there's one lecture I didn't get last year. And of course, that's the one it's going to be.
Was that a conditional probability?
It was an annoying probability. It's an even more basic concept than conditional. Biggest issues are course credit. Faculty and registrar issues. You need to get courses approved. Do you have buy-in? What do you need? Does the faculty senate have to approve it? Does the registrar have to approve it? One short-term solution is at each school, you have an independent study with a local professor who's a point person. And then they are technically the ones assigning the grades, and they have some involvement with the course. Long-term, the goal would be to have it, fully set up at one school, but this is not a bad short-term goal. The other big issue is other schools offering classes. So there's a few schools in the consortium who are putting classes into the pool, but right now we don't have that many classes, at least in math, stats, computer science. And for something like this to really be viable, to make an impact, you want to have a lot of different classes being offered. So we can say, okay, this year we will teach tropical geometry, for instance, and another school will teach non-tropical geometry. And just by doing something like that, we don't have to worry that we only have maybe 3, 4, 5 students who want to take it, but we will have the ability to offer because we can pool enough students across the different schools, and we can justify allocating an FTE to teaching a class which might have low enrollments. All right, so equipment. There's a lot of different equipments you can use. There's a later version of the swivel system in terms of the base that it's on. I actually like the older version better. The new version is a little bit more sensitive in terms of following me. I finally figured out that you can actually put a pause on the tracker, and so I just physically pick it up every now and then. It actually records pretty well. I've got some links in the slides as to just what it looks like. Over the years, the cameras on the iPads have gotten a little bit better. And I've gotten a little bit better in terms of just how to have things focus so you can still read things. Microsoft Surface, just any device where you can write on is also a great thing to have when you're doing these shared classes so that you can be updating the notes. But it's getting easier and easier. The program that I'm using right now, Zoom, has the ability for you to write on the screen immediately. I'm not going to write it now. If I had more time, I would have gone all the way to infinity, similar to the talk you were doing, but I figured this was enough to show what you can be doing. So there's a lot of different features you can see from the pull-down menus. You can write on the page immediately, so you have the ability, if a student is making a comment, to actually adjust the notes in real time. Right now, it's recording me using Zoom. It's recording the slides, and it's recording a little video that I really don't care. I sometimes just put something up like this. The file size is extremely manageable. Less than 100 megabytes, for potentially like a half hour to an hour talk. Whereas if I use, the iPad and have it, recording me directly, it can be, 1 to 3 gigabytes. Now, uploading to YouTube, YouTube doesn't seem to complain about the size of the files, so I'm not really too worried about that. But it is nice to have, modest-sized files and to have, the good quality of the slides. When you record it with the, camera, it's not as good as recording it directly from the computer. Right. So there's a lot of different, types of recordings you can do, and if anybody's interested, I've just posted a couple of things over here. Students are amazing in terms of their video skills, And if you want to prepare nice units, you can do that. That's a lot more work. I much prefer to just continue to lecture as I do. But if you're doing something that's going to be used again and again, year after year, it is worth investing the time to make a couple of units, very well prepared. Your big questions are, what are the purposes of a lecture? I was talking, I think it was with you, about the difficulty of coming to meetings sometimes because you have to find people to teach your class. Here I just have to send my students, well, here's the link from when I taught the class the last iteration. It's nice to have a bank like that. Or if I'm teaching another class, to say, well, here's some review material, here are some lectures, and I know the professor who taught that taught it the right way. Right. Technology issues. One is, if you have higher recordings, it normally takes a little bit more time to process things. A couple of years ago, I taught multivariable calculus. We hired a student to take a really good camera and zoom in. The recordings was not available in the next hour or two, but it was a high quality recording, and you now have those going forward all through time. The iPad is a little bit lower quality, but I can do it by myself. I can do it very cheaply. I can upload it very fast. One of the big issues is, I'm a classical mathematician. I like the blackboard. I like the whiteboard. You don't have the same amount of real estate when you're using slides. And so it's much easier for the people who are watching if you project slides and have everything written out like that, but you lose the ability to have many things and with long, complicated proofs. Now, for the problem-solving class, I didn't really have to have too many things on the blackboard at once. It's think hard, and if it's not working, think harder. And there's just a few small things that are being shown. That's not a big deal. So that class worked beautifully. When you're teaching complex analysis and you have a proof of the Riemann mapping theorem, which is spanning over several days, then the fact that you're only showing one slide at a time is a real issue. Okay, so I promised that this would have at least some different material than the last time. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a class I co-taught this past summer and will be teaching again. So there is a huge need for statistics and programming classes. When I arrived at Williams about a decade ago, we had 3 statisticians. We went down to 2. We are now at 8. It's incredible, the growth. We had nobody who was officially identifying themselves, I believe, as an applied mathematician. We now have 2 plus a few other people who do applied mathematics. So the course content is changing. There's a huge demand from students for classes in data science, in programming and statistics. And unfortunately, we do not have enough FTEs to have those. And so one of the hopes of preparing this class was that we could hopefully relieve some of the demands on the stats and CS classes. Also, we might be able to make a little bit more homogeneous the classes that are taught during the actual academic year in terms of the background people have. So maybe this is a class for people who've had no programming experience, no statistics experience, so everybody's in a very similar boat. So we had multiple teachers at multiple institutions. So there's a lot of pros. One of my favorites is the first one. You only have to do part of the class and you can do the part that you love. I really want to do linear regression. Can I do that? I'll give you linear regression. I'll take this, but then you also have to, we can trade back and forth. And for the most part, it's not too bad. What really made the difference was we had a great administrative coordinator, Liz Evans. And she was just working on this nonstop. She was engaged in all of us. We had somebody who was making sure things got done. Students were hired, students were trained, that we got somebody to talk to the registrars at all the different colleges to make sure that there was credit. It really helps to have a point person who's doing this, who's not one of the faculty people. And this is the advantage of being part of the Liberal Arts Consortium for Online Learning, unless they've changed what the acronym stands for. It's something like that. It's a collection of liberal arts colleges where there are some staff positions devoted to working for sharing resources like this. Languages is another example where there's a great need for something like this, and collaborations like this are going on. The hope is that the steady state of the course will not be as expensive to teach as the initial states, because we will have so much of the content recorded. Since you're not responsible for as much of the class, you can focus on a small part and do it really well, or do it satisfactory, and then in each year, in each iteration, improve it just a little bit. So maybe after 3 or 4 iterations, it's in a really good shape. So it is very expandable, it's very scalable. It's in the summer, so you also have a little bit of freedom in terms of when you're on, because the class is taught asynchronous. We can target different sectors in different schools. And it was fascinating to see how the different schools treated it. Some schools wanted to limit enrollment just to students who had course deficiencies. and said, we don't want students making up courses during the academic year. If somebody's having trouble doing things, having them do a course overload may not be the best solution for a student who's having issues. Why not have them take one of these classes in the summer? Other schools opened it up to everybody. The other thing is, since it's an online class, we're already having the students doing things online. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a tremendous amount of great resources online. Work those into the classes. Some of the biggest cons is you don't get to know the students well. And it's hard, but it's a trade-off. I like to tell my students when we're doing business consulting, you don't have to come up with the best solution. You just have to beat what's out there. And that's a low bar in many sectors that we can do. And so if you compare this to students not being able to take a class like this at all, what are the benefits of having students exposed either during the freshman year, if we put it during the academic semester, or summer after their freshman year, to an intro to data science and having some of these basic skills so that they can then take a SQL class where they can see if they like it. And so there's enough benefits to it that I don't think it's terrible. I wouldn't want my students to be taking all their classes online. But as a supplement to existing offerings, I think it's good. The asynchronous nature really cuts down on interactions, but we had common office hours, so that was not horrible. And so we basically tried to juggle when we were available because we know everybody has different schedules. So you would not have all the office hours at the same time. Sometimes it would be a morning office hour, sometimes it would be late at night, sometimes it would be weekend, and the hope is that something works for each student. If not, there's always emails. As I mentioned, as a plus, this is also a minus. Some schools only let certain students take it. The other thing is, and I don't know how much of a fear this is, but I'm always afraid of schools replacing FTEs with computers and online classes, and now we don't need to hire as many faculty. And so that is something to always be concerned about as we start making more and more offerings like this. If we have a class that's already existing and packaged, if students start taking that rather than classes that are being physically offered, what will the consequences of that be long term? So if anybody is interested, I have a bunch of video references just where you can click on these and see a little bit more detail about what the different videos are. And then I just wanted to use the rest of the time to just discuss and get people's comments. So thank you.
We have time for questions and comments.
I'm sorry? Yes. And then I think we're going to have a technology malfunction right now.